Last year, I was in Egypt in Dahab to dive deep. I had decided to really go for depth, to really see what is my body capable of doing. I was diving with a friend of mine, Sarah, who's a fantastic coach, and I had access to her thinking and her being very different, her way of approaching certain things to dive deeper. I set the rope, and on the morning I felt quite tired, and a part of me was saying, I shouldn't be doing this. And I didn't listen to that, and I decided I want to really go for this dive. On the way down, I've started feeling a need to breathe that I don't usually get on the way down. But I still felt strong, and I thought, well, let's make this a challenge to see, even though things aren't going well, can I still do the dive? And I got to the surface, and I felt fine. And then I felt this irritation in my throat, and I coughed. And Sarah said to me, oh no. And I coughed again, and I spat in my hand, and there were flecks of blood in what that had come from my throat. And what happens is when you compress so much in your lungs and your trachea, you run the risk of actually getting compression injuries, which has never happened to me and which is quite unusual in freediving. And it only happens if you do push beyond where you should be. And Sarah and I were sitting talking, and at the same time, we just looked at each other, and she was like, you're not speaking your truth to the extent that your throat is bleeding. You're being so untrue that you actually injured yourself. And it was an incredible turning point for me in truth, in realizing that we cannot compromise on that. I cannot compromise on my truth. And I learned that lesson in the most painful, physically and emotionally, because that dive stopped me from competing in world championships. I injured myself to the extent that I had to withdraw from the championships that were 4 weeks later, and I was going for a gold medal.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Hello, Susie. How are you?
I'm great, and you? Hi.
What do you think the truth was that she wasn't expressing?
I would say that it's not about the competition, because a lot of what she was doing was about trying to get to deeper depths and not being able to push her body to get to those depths. Because for the first time ever, and definitely the first time in Egypt, like, she wasn't able to because her body was rebelling. And also maybe a little bit about stepping out of the spotlight and being able to say, this is what I do for me. Like, this is my passion because of how I feel about it, because of how I feel about the ocean, instead of it being about needing to get to a depth to satisfy the sponsors, because that's a huge pressure.
I think there's a misconception around being extroverted and actually being open.
Yeah.
Because I can be extroverted, but I'm not really open. I'm more private.
When you get to a point where the inside and the outside are the same person, then you can choose how much to share, and it's less about putting on like public face versus private face.
I'd come out of a phase of, I guess, what other people would say is success. I'd broken a whole lot of records the year before. I had been nominated for a whole range of accolades and media moments and things that from the outside look absolutely lovely and rewarding, but actually mean very little to me and on a personal level. And suddenly things just weren't working out. I couldn't pay my rent. I was so worried about how I was going to make it through every month that I was petrified every day. And I think what really got me and got me down was the distance between my everyday life and the way people were looking at me and saying, you're living the dream, you're so lucky. I couldn't reconcile these two realities at all.
Because she called me last year and she was really upset. I was at work and we had this long conversation, and she said it was almost like she was being torn in two, and it felt like she'd been trying so hard to follow this vision that she had, and it just wasn't working out for her. Like, it physically wasn't working out for her.
So, Hanli, what was your leap of faith?
I think the leap for me was to let go of the control and to be vulnerable and to say, I can't do this. I can't do this. I'm not strong enough to do this. I'm not big enough to do this.
One of the hardest things for her is to allow people to help her, not because she doesn't want them to be part of her life, But I don't think she ever wants to be indebted to somebody for helping her in a way and for taking away some of this self-drive that she has and this autonomousness of being a completely self-sufficient little person. At the end of a natural line happened for her when everything that she'd ever done, she was fully equipped to do, or if she wasn't, she could push herself even harder and then she would do it. She'd always manage it. And I think a year ago, she got to a place where even if you did your best wasn't enough, which was devastating.
The only way to really find a turning point, to really get to the point where things have to change, is when you really crash. Because when you're holding on so much to the structure, believing that, but this is how it has to look, this is what it has to be, how can it change? But if I drop it and it smashes and it's in pieces anyway, well, then it can be anything. And for me, when I let go and smashed and just broke into all those pieces, was the first and only time where I could go, well, there's nothing left anyway, so what can it be moving forward? The greatest grace that's been shown to me is that there were people I could say that to, that there were people in my life who were big enough to hear that. Because what I was so afraid of was that people thought that I had it sorted. And like the princess in the tower, I just wanted a prince to come and sweep me up and take care of me. And I remember saying to a friend of me, I just want someone to make me tea and stroke my hair. I can't do this anymore.
For her to come to a place where she had to say to me, look, everybody thinks I'm this dream person. I'm living this amazing life. I'm doing these fantastic things. And it sucks. I go home every night and I'm lonely. I'm miserable. I don't know how I'm going to cope. For her to get to a place like that and admit it, I think was one of the most crippling places for her to get to, and one of the most humbling.
So you moved forward. What happened?
Doug was at my house to work on me, and I just burst into tears. And I just sat there crying and crying and crying, and he quite pragmatically and correctly stated, I can't work on you when you're like this.
Hanli hides it well. So when she was in crisis, and a lot of people do this, you don't see it. They're slowly melting on the inside. So outwardly she was doing huge, sort of lots of work and things and being seen in places, but inwardly there was the struggle going on. And one needs to reach a point where you have to create a change. And she'd found herself in a place where she wasn't having the joy in doing the things she loved. And that often is part of a stress response where literally when we slip into our fight or flight mode, everything is a collapse, everything is a close down, the world gets very small and tight and a lot of pressure. And she reached a point like that breaking point. And I think because of the place she was at, it allowed her to actually say, yes, I'll accept help.
And he said to me, I think you need to phone my friend Greg. You need to have a chat with him.
Hanli now accepted that in the water her aloneness was her liberation, but on land she needed to partner with others in order to survive and thrive. Into this new space stepped Greg James. He was perfectly placed to help Hanli convert her dedication and passion into a career that could pay the bills and more.
Her panic and her trauma at face value was this terrible financial pressure. But in terms of the practical setup of her life, what has unfolded for her?
People would sit in jobs, I know at the end of each month they get paid, but for Hanli, the pressure of just trying to make ends meet became pressurized. What happens with people like Hanli is that they have to do everything on their own, and there's no support, well, there is support, but sometimes they don't want it. And it's only when people hit rock bottom that they do finally reach out. And it was really just saying, well, Hanli, let's just go back to the beginning and see what you've got. And what you've got is a massive talent, and you need to use it and have faith in what you've got.
It turned things for me. He said, you've done the hard work. And he said, we we need to put some structures in place. And I'd been needing to be part of a little bit of support for so long that we was enough for me to go home, do the homework he gave me, see him the next week. And I remember he said, it's like I've had 2 meetings with 2 different women. The person I met who was just crying in my office last week, and the person today who's back on track, got a vision, just needs to put certain things in place.